I really gotta figure this out, don't I? I mean, it could change the whole plan after all. Plus, I hope it's not what I think it is. I just wish I knew who or what I could believe right now. Why isn't it working? Yeah, well, it's torn apart. Dumb question, but why is it like this to begin with? No, that's not what I mean. Something's just not adding up to me. The seller claimed the cam chain tensioners failed. They were slapping and causing that horrible noise, but who's to say that that wasn't a story that was made up specifically to make a sale? You don't need to pull half the stuff that's off this car off to get to those parts. They're on the side, so most of this could have stayed where it was. He claimed he was gonna do a rebuild. Pull the engine, manual swap, fix everything, build it up all at once. Why do that if all it needs is tensioners though? Furthermore, if that was your plan, why sell the car super cheap saying that tensioners are just too expensive to justify buying for the car? They're expensive, sure, but if the plan was a rebuild and a manual swap, they're by far and away not the most expensive thing you'll need. In other words, the more I think about it, the less it starts to add up. As much as I'd like to believe all people are honest, the nature of this being a transaction could be all the incentive a seller needs to make something up. No use in dwelling on something you can't know though. This is my project now after all. And the one thing I do know is this. This is a video of the car running right before it was torn apart. And that is absolutely not how this car is supposed to sound. Nor is it how I want it to stay sounding. At this point, I've never worked on one of these before. I don't know what could be causing this noise. He could be telling the truth and it might be tensioners, or it's an actual knock from something inside the engine. Either way, I can't stand looking at this car sit anymore. At the very worst, if the engine isn't savable, this car is worth more as a rolling shell than what I paid for it. But that doesn't mean I don't want to know what the issue is, figure out what the truth is. And who knows? Who's to say I won't get lucky and it'll be something easy? Either way, as I unload these parts indoors, I'm slowly starting to realize how out of my depths I feel. It's a foreign platform, similar to what I've seen in the past, but it's not the same. And looking at the quality of some of these parts that were pulled off, I wonder how many of them are even worthy of putting back on, at least without some improvement. Take the fuel rail, for example. Similar to what's on my B5, but the O-rings are showing their age. No sense in not fixing that. And the valve covers have absolutely seen better days. The gasket underneath is torn in multiple places, and the whole surface is covered in pitting. Gotta fix that too. And don't even get me started on the coils. Who knows when the last time these were replaced was? Half of them are cracked too. And as far as headlights go, how do you even get them to look like this? I haven't seen a set this far gone before, but the closest way I could imagine would be with a can of spray paint. The engine plastics look pretty good at least, though they haven't been cleaned in years. And the biggest unknown I have is this manifold. From what I was told, this era of 4.2s has a fairly complicated intake manifold. It's not just pipes, and it does some level of adjustment depending on how high in the RPM range you are. But then again, that's just what the seller told me. I'm not sure if rebuilding these is a thing or not, or if you should upgrade it, or what, really. In fact, I really don't know much about this car. But I guess that's par for the course for right now, isn't it? It's a new project and a new platform. It'd be weird to come in with knowledge. There'd be no fun if there wasn't any learning. So maybe that's where I should start. To To me, the first real phase of any new project lies in learning about it. And for running projects, the easiest way to do that is probably just to drive it, but I'm not in that position. I've got to learn about my S6 through good old-fashioned research. And my approach is to get more and more specific. Sure, I could start by looking up what actually is causing the knock, but I'm not going to understand anything without having a foundation to go off of. No. I want to learn the basics. What is this thing? Why was it made? How many were made? What was the engine? Was it shared with any other car? How much power does it make? What kind of differential does it have? What's the transmission? All that basic stuff, really. And my theory was that that would help me come up with some more complicated and specific questions to ask that I would actually understand the answers to, hopefully leading to a car that's running. Or at least diagnosed. But sadly, all that really was, at this point, was a hope. Turns out, this was not a common car, especially in the States. In fact, as far as info on this exact model goes, online there really wasn't much. So I figured I would take the old school approach. A little money spent on learning is always worth it. Compared to looking online, the signs were promising. I mean, this book explicitly states it includes information on the S6, which is different than the all-road and the A6 with the V8, so it should at least get me a little further down the information train, right? Initially, the signs were promising. The S6 was indeed mentioned, but this book wasn't explicitly about it. In fact, most of it is centered around the A6, and most of the engine-related information in it is 2.7 related. In other words, more helpful for the S4 than anything. So far, the best I could find was an explanation of what the engine code was for the S6, and how it's a different variant of the timing belt V8 found in the A6. More power, higher compression, a tunable ECU, and that was about all the specifics. The rest of this information was all generic, which, to be fair, is actually quite helpful for a platform I know nothing about. I found a couple places that did mention the cam chain tensioners, but really they were just system diagrams or explaining how it actually works. Looks like the cam chains are driven by the timing belt. No information on replacing it or figuring out if it's failed. What I did learn is while the engine is a V8, it's actually quite similar to the 2.7. The timing system and overall layout is relatively similar, so at least I can cross-reference information with that. The issue is I want the car moving. I really don't like looking at it just sit there, especially when, for all I know, it could either be super far from running or super close. Either way, I wanted to get the parts I knew the car needed on the way. That way I could at least start to look into it in some capacity. The only problem was I didn't know what to get. How do you know something for certain? Is it really true, or have you just convinced yourself that it's true? It could be the tensioners. But why is the car torn apart like it is? It just didn't make sense. The seller's words didn't add up, but they really didn't have to. He was a seller trying to get rid of a project, and I was the person who bought it. I guess I should probably start with what this car actually needs to even just be put back together. Basic tune-up stuff, gaskets, fluids, definitely coils. Come to think of it, I haven't even looked at the rest of the car. I've really just been focusing on the engine. For all I know, even if the engine was running, it might not even be roadworthy. I gotta check that out too. But first, I need to figure out if I should order these tensioners or not. They're not cheap. That the seller was telling the truth about. Maybe I could see what other cars sound like with failed tensioners. Okay, so it is actually very similar to the sound. Maybe he wasn't lying after all. I guess I have no real reason to think he was. I should probably just bite the bullet and order the parts. I could return them or use them in a rebuild. And the book mentions that they're part of the timing system, so I might as well get a timing kit too. I don't know when that was done after all. First purchase complete. Now I should give the rest of the car an inspection. But first, I gotta get it inside. Which is easier said than done when you work alone. The car isn't exactly light, and it's the hottest day of the year so far. I quickly realized the gravel was at an incline. I wouldn't think a slope as flat as this would cause this much trouble, but here I am. And it's been sitting for so long that none of the parts are wanting to rotate smoothly. This is terrible. Every time I get it moving a bit, it just rolls right back down. This was so much easier pushing it downhill. Getting it up the lip from the gravel to the driveway is almost impossible solo. This was just so much easier with the tow. Wait a minute, the E30 has a tow hook. Probably would have helped if I tightened the tow strap though. But the good news is the idea worked. And as sketchy as it looks, who cares if it works? Plus, I never thought I'd see an E30 towing an S6. Once the car was actually on pavement, it was shockingly easy to push. I think it was heavy enough that it was just digging itself into the gravel rather than actually rolling. But now that it's on pavement, I feel like I can actually make progress. It feels like it's been weeks that I've been dreaming about actually working on a car in this garage, and now the moment is finally at hand. I have no idea how it's gonna go though. I haven't given this car any sort of inspection yet, so hopefully the chassis isn't too terrible. After following the book's instructions to get the car on jack stands, I crept underneath and slowly started to realize that this might have been a decent purchase. Now, it's never going to be a showroom car. It's got decently high mileage and it's pretty old, but that's not what I bought it for. I bought it to drive. And so far, it's looking promising. The only rust I could find underneath was on the oil pan, but I think we caught it early enough to fix it, or we could just replace it. It also looks like it needs control arm bushings, but that's not a big worry of mine as it's not staying at stock ride height. It'll definitely get a full suspension. I was already planning to replace that anyways, and other than an oil leak from the pan, it's really not that terrible. None of the wheel bearings had play either, which is an awesome sign. Now the brakes are another story. They're pretty identical to the S4s, but the car definitely needs them. I don't think these have been done for a while, and it definitely looks like the car hasn't been driven for a while either. Suspension-wise, it looks pretty good. Couple bushings here and there, but everything in here really just mimics what I've seen before in the B5, just a little bigger. But that's honestly pretty nice since I know how to work on it already. And as far as the rear goes, the story's about the same. Desperately needs brakes, but the suspension itself looks completely fine. It's a little different than my B5, but I'm guessing that's because it's an Avant. I also made another interesting discovery. I didn't notice this before, but it seems as if this car is missing a muffler. In fact, it's missing both mufflers, almost intentionally. But I'd say that's a low priority fix. Other than the brakes, the most concerning thing I found on the suspension of this car was the outer tie rod on the passenger side. This one is completely broken. The joint has play in it, and I can only imagine how awful that feels while driving. Should be a pretty easy thing to add to the list. Other than that though, this side was relatively the same as the other. So far, so good. Seems like this might not have been a terrible purchase. Still worth a lot more than what I spent. Though I'm still questioning how honest the seller was. I mean, he did say the tires were almost new. They're a couple years old, and to the courts. I guess now that it's inside, I can actually start looking at the engine too, but the hood strut's not on, so I might as well just take it off. Right now, I had one singular goal, and it was a pretty easy one too. All I wanted to do was familiarize myself with the layout of this engine. If I'm gonna spend time fixing it, I need to learn how it works, and I need to learn where everything is. So that is exactly what I spent time doing. So many new vacuum lines, new coolant lines, new routing, new everything. It's gonna take some time before I feel comfortable in this engine bay, but I think that'll be time well spent. This is kind of weird. Right now I can't see anything wrong with these tensioners. I still need to learn how they work, but visually they don't look like the ones that I've seen broken online. So are they still worth replacing? Honestly, right now I don't know. I'm not sure what to believe. It's easy to take things at face value, but you never really know how true something is unless you prove it for yourself. So back in the world of research I go. At least that's how I spent my time until the first order of parts got here. I had everything from the first batch. None of the stuff from my personal inspection, but this is everything the car technically needs before the engine should theoretically run. A timing belt tool for the timing belt itself. I even had both tensioners, despite the fact I didn't know if I'd even be installing them. Either way, I was ready. I even had new chains and gaskets. I also ordered a whole slew of Audi-specific tools to work with the timing job. One of the best parts about that book I got was that it recommended stuff like this. And with all the fluid I would need, realistically, I was ready to fix the issue the seller said the car had. Ready to get it back together, but something still wasn't sitting right with me. Do I really know that his diagnosis was right? A little while later, with a full day ahead of me, I went out to work on the car. On the surface, I was mentally prepared to replace the tensioners, do timing, and take what the seller said at face value, but that still wasn't really sitting right with me. Deep down, I was worried this car had an actual knock, needing a rebuild, and those tensioners were just a cover-up. The past couple days, I'd been doing research on them, and from what I can tell, visually they do look perfect. Well, functional. They're old, so they're not going to be perfect. But really, if they have tension and the shoes are there, they should be fine. Unless timing skipped somehow, they shouldn't be knocking. And if timing did skip, that isn't where the knock would come from. So before I waste time removing them, I should probably check timing. First of all, see if the engine rotates, but second of all, see if any teeth were skipped. From my research, both of the tensioners should have pressure at top dead center, and all the timing marks should be aligned. Though there's only one way to find out, actually turning the engine over. What was that? And am I crazy, or does the pulley on the water pump look all angled? No, there's no way no one checked that. That could definitely be the noise. This is not supposed to have this much play. In fact, the bearing is almost completely shot. So if that is the issue, that knock would make complete sense. In other words, maybe it's completely misdiagnosed. What if all this car really needed was just a water pump? Not $1,000 tensioners, just a water pump. But it's really loose. Loose enough that I worry it did skip timing. So the only way I'll know if this engine is okay is by checking timing. I've got to check the marks. I spun the engine around to what the book said was top dead center. These cam gears have two holes, the bigger of which need to face each other for top dead center. They both do, which is a good sign. The car doesn't have the timing cover right now, so I can't check this mark, but the more reliable way to check the bottom end is by looking at the view hole. That notch in there would only be visible if the bottom end was at TDC. That's where this plug goes in to swap the belt, so the bottom end is in time. And both the right and left tensioners have tension, so it's all really gonna hinge on the cams. And since it's a VVT engine, we really only care about the exhaust cam, but they should all be pretty close. I checked, and the passenger side seemed good, so I moved on to the driver's side only to find out it also looked fine. From what I can tell, this engine is in time. I might have just gotten really lucky. What if I can actually just return those expensive tensioners? I guess I won't really know until I get the engine back together and running, but right now, I see no reason to put them on when these ones look completely fine. I should probably pivot a bit, focus on timing, and just see if everything's gonna work. Plus, it's not like there's any use in rushing. The car would need quite a few other things before I'd feel safe taking it on a test drive. I hope I'm right about this. It's weird to try and develop an understanding in a world you know nothing of. I still don't know what the truth is. I've got theories, but really that's just what I've convinced myself is true. The only way I'm gonna know if that is the case is by testing it, putting everything back together and seeing if my understanding was correct. And that's not always the case. It's possible to feel absolutely confident that something's the case, when in reality, all it takes is a single life-altering event to change your perspective entirely. And if it can happen once, who's to say it can't happen again? Can you actually know something's true with certainty? I have no idea. What I do know is this: I won't be able to tell if my water pump theory for the noise was correct unless I test it. And since the car's already this far apart, I see no reason why I shouldn't make some upgrades while putting it back together. Sometimes the scariest part of life is what you don't know. But when you make it known by figuring it out, the real fun can start. Probably time to start getting this car back on the road. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.